Did you really think your peasant sweat would make my lawn look like a sterling estate? You're just like your mother, useless, my brother-in-law, Dorian, sneered. I watched from the driveway, my heart stopping as he stepped toward my 10-year-old daughter. He didn't just stand there. He purposely raised his expensive leather shoe and kicked over Lennon's rusted push mower. The heavy metal machine flipped, sending my little girl sprawling onto the sharp gravel. She cried out in pain as the stones scraped her palms, but Dorian didn't show a flicker of mercy. Instead, he reached down and snatched the glass jar she had kept tucked under her arm. That jar was everything to us. It was filled with crumpled $1 bills and heavy quarters that Lennon had saved for months. She had been mowing lawns in the sweltering heat every day after school. Her goal was simple but beautiful. She wanted to buy me a used car so I wouldn't have to walk 5 miles to my cleaning jobs in the rain. Dorian unscrewed the lid with a mocking grin. He walked over to his massive marble koi pond and slowly emptied the jar. I watched, paralyzed with grief, as the coins sank into the deep, dark water. "Consider this a fee for the eyesore of having you on my property," he barked. I stood there, my soul feeling bruised and battered. From the balcony above, my mother-in-law, Ottilie, leaned over the railing and let out a sharp, cold laugh. She watched my daughter dive into the freezing pond water, shivering as she tried to grab the sunken coins from the mud. They looked down on us like we were insects. But then, a low hum filled the air. A sleek, black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. A man in a tailored charcoal suit named Hawk stepped out. He didn't look at the mansion or the wealthy bullies. His eyes were fixed solely on my daughter's shivering, purple hands. My name is Dakota, and for 5 long years, I have been treated as the unfortunate mistake of the Sterling Vane family. I was never supposed to be one of them. I was just a girl from a normal background who fell in love with Pascal, the golden son of the Sterling Empire. When we married, his family looked at me with pure disgust. They thought I was a gold digger, but I loved Pascal for his heart, not his bank account. We had a beautiful life for a while, filled with laughter and our daughter, Lennon. But everything changed on a Tuesday evening when a phone call shattered my world. Pascal died in a massive, suspicious factory fire at one of the family's main plants. Before I could even finish crying, Ottilie and Dorian moved in like vultures. They presented a forged will that claimed Pascal wanted me to have nothing. They used their high-priced lawyers to strip Lennon and me of our home, our names, and every bit of our dignity. They moved us into a tiny, drafty apartment on the edge of town and told the world we were distant relatives they were helping out of charity. They wanted to erase the fact that I was ever Pascal's wife. They thought I was weak because I was quiet, but they were wrong. Every night, while Lennon slept, I sat at my small kitchen table with a laptop. I had been secretly documenting every safety violation at the factory where Pascal died. I had talked to former workers and gathered leaked emails. I wasn't just a grieving widow, I was a hunter. The digital trail I was following didn't just lead to bad luck, it led directly to Dorian's private office. He had cut costs on the fire sprinklers to save money for his yacht, and my husband had paid the ultimate price for that greed. Hawk walked across the lawn with a calm power that made Dorian freeze in his tracks. He didn't look at Dorian's outstretched hand or acknowledge his attempts at small talk. Instead, he walked straight to the edge of the koi pond where Lennon was climbing out, soaking wet and gasping for air. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card with a gleaming gold crest on the front. He handed it to my daughter, his voice loud enough for Dorian and Ottilie to hear every word. "I own the 3 estates neighboring this one," Hawk said, his voice like rolling thunder. "I've been watching you work for weeks," Hawk continued, ignoring Dorian's sputtering protests. "I need a head landscaper for my properties. I need someone who actually understands the value of a hard day's work and the value of $1. The job is yours if you want it, Lennon, and the pay is exactly 10 times what this gentleman was giving you." Lennon looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock, clutching the wet card to her chest. Dorian looked like he was about to explode with rage. He hated being ignored, and he hated even more that someone was helping us. Dorian tried to step between them, his face turning a deep, angry red. "You can't do that. They are my tenants. They are nobodies," he screamed. Hawk finally looked at him, and the coldness in his eyes made Dorian take a step back. What Dorian didn't realize was that Hawk wasn't just some wealthy neighbor. He was Dorian's biggest business rival. He was the man who had just outbid the Sterling Vane family for the city's massive port expansion project the day before. Hawk was the king of the city, and he had just decided to become our guardian angel out of spite and respect. Dorian couldn't stand the fact that we were winning. A week after Lennon started working for Hawk, a brand new, professional-grade zero-turn mower was delivered to our tiny apartment. It was a gift from Hawk to help Lennon handle the large estates. Dorian was so furious that he actually drove down to our neighborhood in his sports car. He called the police, led by a man named Officer Soren who was secretly on the Sterling payroll. Dorian claimed that Lennon had stolen the mower from his own shed and that we were trying to sell it for cash. Officer Soren arrived with his lights flashing, trying to intimidate us in front of all our neighbors. He demanded that we hand over the keys and prepare for arrest. "This machine belongs to Mr. Sterling Vane," Soren barked, reaching for his handcuffs. I stood on the porch, my heart racing, but I didn't back down. Lennon stood next to the mower, her hand resting on the seat. She wasn't scared because she knew something they didn't. Hawk hadn't just sent a mower. He had sent a piece of high-tech security equipment designed to protect his head landscaper from people like Dorian. "Check the dashboard, officer," I said, my voice steady. Lennon reached up and tapped a small, hidden screen. The mower was a custom prototype with a built-in 360-degree dashcam that stayed on even when the engine was off. The screen flickered to life, showing crystal-clear footage from the night before. It showed Dorian's personal gardener, Riven, sneaking onto our property with a set of wire cutters. The video captured Riven trying to sabotage the mower's engine while Dorian watched from his car, laughing. Soren's face went pale. He had no choice but to drop the charges and leave, while Dorian sped away in a cloud of dust. The harassment didn't stop at our home. Dorian knew he couldn't touch the mower anymore, so he targeted Lennon at her school. He made sure his son, Thorn, knew exactly what to do. Thorn was a carbon copy of his father, arrogant, loud, and cruel. During lunch break, Thorn gathered a group of kids in the cafeteria. He stood on a chair and pointed at Lennon, who was sitting quietly at a corner table. "Look at the charity case," Thorn shouted. "Her mom is a beggar who cleans toilets, and she spends her weekends cutting grass like a servant. You don't belong here with us." Lennon tried to ignore him, but Thorn wouldn't stop. He followed her out to the playground and grabbed her backpack. He threw it into a deep mud puddle and then tried to push Lennon in after it. "Go back to the gutter, Dakota's brat," he sneered. The other kids watched, some laughing and others looking away in shame. I arrived just as the principal was coming out to break it up. I saw my daughter standing there, covered in mud but with her head held high. She wasn't crying. She looked Thorn right in the eye and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, glossy photo. "I might be a servant, Thorn," she said, her voice loud and clear, "but at least my mom is honest." She held up the photo for everyone to see. It was a picture of Thorn's father, Dorian, sitting at a private table in a dark restaurant. He was holding hands and kissing a woman named Brielle, a local socialite who definitely wasn't Thorn's mother. The playground went silent. Thorn's face went from smug to horrified in an instant. Lennon had found the photo in an old envelope while she was cleaning out a drawer. She didn't push him into the mud. She destroyed his world with the truth. When Ottilie found out about the photo, she was beyond livid. She couldn't attack us legally for the photo. So she went after Lennon's education. She used her massive influence on the private school's board to have Lennon's scholarship reviewed. The very next morning, I was called into the office of the principal, a man named Lowell. He looked at me with fake pity as he slid a document across his desk. "I'm afraid the endowment for Lennon's scholarship has been redirected," he said. "If you want her to stay, you must pay the full tuition of $20,000 by Monday, or she will be expelled." I felt the walls closing in. $20,000 was an impossible amount of money for a widow working cleaning jobs. Lowell knew it, and Ottilie certainly knew it. They wanted to see us crawl. I walked out of the school, my hands shaking with rage. I went back to our apartment and started digging through a box of Pascal's old papers, looking for anything that could help. Deep at the bottom of a rusted tin box, I found a yellowed envelope addressed to Lennon. It was from my husband's grandfather, Albin, the only Sterling who had ever been kind to me before he passed away. Inside the envelope was a certificate for a small, private trust fund. Albin had set it up the day Lennon was born. but he had hidden it from Ottilie and Dorian because he knew they were greedy. I called the bank, and the manager confirmed the account was still active. Ottilie had been so busy freezing our main accounts that she had completely forgotten about this tiny, separate fund. It didn't just have $20,000. It had grown over the years into a significant amount of money. I didn't just pay the tuition. I paid for the next 3 years in advance, leaving Lowell and Ottilie speechless when I dropped the check on his desk. With the tuition paid, Lennon wanted to show me something she had been keeping secret. She took me to a small, dusty storage unit on the outskirts of the city. She had been paying for the unit with the extra money she made from working for Hawk. "Mom, I found the key in Dad's old desk before they kicked us out," she whispered as she slid the heavy metal door open. My breath caught in my throat. Inside wasn't a cheap used car or old furniture. It was a pristine, vintage luxury sedan that had belonged to my husband. It was his pride and joy, a car Dorian had claimed was lost in the fire. Pascal had hidden the car here weeks before the fire, as if he knew something bad was going to happen. I sat in the driver's seat, the smell of his cologne still faintly clinging to the leather. I felt a wave of grief, but also a surge of hope. Lennon started poking around the back seat, looking for her old toys. "Mom, look, the seat is lumpy," she said, pointing to the expensive upholstery. I reached into the gap between the cushions and felt something hard. I pulled it out. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger filled with Pascal's handwriting. My heart hammered against my ribs as I flipped through the pages. It wasn't a diary. It was a detailed record of every bribe, every kickback, and every illegal deal Dorian had made over the last decade. Pascal had been tracking everything. There was a specific section titled The Factory, which detailed exactly how much Dorian had paid the safety inspectors to ignore the broken sprinklers. It was the smoking gun I had been searching for. Dorian hadn't just been greedy. He had been a criminal, and my husband had died because he was about to turn this ledger over to the police. I knew I couldn't just go to the police yet. I needed to make Dorian and Ottilie feel the same fear they had forced on us. The Sterling Vane family was hosting their annual legacy dinner that night, a black tie event for the city's elite. I decided it was time to make a grand entrance. I spent the afternoon cleaning the vintage sedan until it sparkled like a diamond. I put on the one black dress I had managed to keep, and Lennon dressed in her best outfit. I drove that beautiful, roaring car right up to the front of the Sterling mansion, the engine echoing off the stone walls. The valet nearly fainted when he saw the car. Ottilie and Dorian were standing on the front steps, greeting guests when I pulled up. Ottilie's face went from a fake smile to a ghostly white in a split second. She looked like she had seen a ghost. "Pascal's car," she whispered, her voice trembling. She marched down the steps, her heels clicking loudly on the pavement. "How dare you drive that here? That is a family heirloom. It belongs to the estate." "Hand over the keys immediately, Dakota, or I will have you arrested for grand theft auto." I didn't even turn off the engine. I rolled down the window and looked her right in the eye, feeling a power I hadn't felt in years. "The car is legally registered in Lennon's name, Ottilie," I said, my voice cold and clear for the other guests to hear. "And if you come any closer, I'll call my lawyer. I've already filed a restraining order against Dorian after the incident with the mower. You're the ones who are trespassing on our peace." I shifted the car into gear and drove off, leaving the most powerful family in the city standing in the dust of the son they had betrayed. The ledger gave me a name I needed to find: Brielle's brother. I learned that Brielle wasn't just Dorian's mistress. She was the sister of the lead fire marshal who had inspected the factory after the fire. His name was Caius, and according to the ledger, he had received a massive payment into an offshore account the day after Pascal's funeral. I hired a private investigator with some of the trust fund money to track him down. It didn't take long. Caius was living in a luxury condo he couldn't possibly afford on a city salary. I met Caius in a quiet park, showing him a copy of one of the ledger pages. He tried to act tough at first, but when he saw the exact bank transfer numbers, his face crumbled. "Dorian told me it was just a small electrical fire," Caius stammered, his eyes darting around. "I didn't know anyone was still in the building. He told me the sprinklers were being repaired, and it was an accident. He promised me the money was for my silence about the paperwork, nothing more." He was terrified of going to prison, and he was even more terrified of what Dorian would do to him. Chaos revealed the ultimate betrayal. Brielle had been blackmailing Dorian for years. She knew the fire wasn't an accident. She had a recording of Dorian telling the fire marshal to delay the report so the insurance company would pay out faster. Brielle was tired of being a secret, and Chaos was tired of living in fear. "She's ready to talk, Dakota," Chaos whispered. "She has the original recording. She realized that if Dorian could kill his own brother, he would eventually kill her too. She just needs protection." I realized then that the walls were finally closing in on Dorian. A week later, an invitation arrived at our apartment. It was for the Founders Gala, the biggest event of the year, hosted by Hawk. Usually, people like me were only allowed to work the event as servers, but this time was different. The invitation was gold embossed and addressed to Dakota and Lennon Sterling. Hawk called me that evening to make sure I was coming. "It's time to stop mowing lawns and start owning them, Dakota," he said, his voice warm and encouraging. "The city needs to see who the real Sterlings are. Bring the ledger. Bring your strength." Hawk revealed a secret that explained everything. He had been Pascal's best friend in college. They had stayed in touch for years, and Pascal had told him about his suspicions regarding Dorian's corruption. "Pascal was worried, Dakota. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, I had to look out for you and Lennon," Hawk explained. "I've been playing the long game for 5 years, waiting for the right moment to take Dorian down without destroying the company's employees. That moment is tonight." Hawk wasn't just a rival. He was the protector my husband had chosen for us. The gala was held at the city's grandest museum. When Lennon and I arrived in the vintage sedan, the paparazzi went wild. I walked up the red carpet with my head held high, clutching a small evening bag that contained a digital copy of the ledger. Dorian and Ottilie were already there, standing in the center of the room like royalty. When they saw us, Dorian's face turned a sickly shade of green. He tried to have security remove us, but Hawk stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. "These are my guests of honor, Dorian. Try to be civil for once." Ottilie wasn't going to let us enjoy the night without a fight. She had found out we were coming and decided to play one of her cruelest games. She had sent a woman named Clarabelle to my apartment earlier that day, claiming she was a stylist sent by Hawk. Clarabelle had brought a dress that she claimed was the latest fashion, a puffy neon pink disaster that looked like a joke. Ottilie wanted me to show up at the gala looking like a clown, so everyone would laugh at the poor widow, who didn't know how to dress for high society. But Ottilie forgot that before I married Pascal, I had worked in a high-end fashion boutique to pay for my college. I knew exactly what Clarabelle was trying to do the moment I saw the dress. Instead of wearing the neon monstrosity, I spent the afternoon with a pair of sewing shears and a needle. I cut, draped, and restyled the expensive silk fabric. By the time I was done, I had turned the ugly gown into a stunning, avant-garde black and pink masterpiece. It looked like something straight off a Paris runway. I looked sophisticated, powerful, and modern. When I walked into the ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. Instead of laughter, I heard whispers of admiration. The city's fashion critics were already snapping photos. Ottilie stood near the buffet, her glass of champagne shaking in her hand. Her plan had backfired completely. I didn't look like a charity case. I looked like the new queen of the city. I walked straight up to her and smiled. "Thank you for the fabric, Ottilie." It was a bit loud at first, but I think I found the beauty underneath, just like I'm doing with the family business. The gala was reaching its peak when Dorian decided to make his move. He was fuming from the attention I was getting and the fact that Hawk was ignoring him. He waited until I was standing near the center of the room, talking to a group of influential investors. He accidentally tripped while carrying a full glass of dark red wine. He aimed the glass directly at my dress, hoping to ruin my masterpiece and humiliate me in front of everyone. "Oh, how clumsy of me," he started to say, his face twisted in a fake look of concern. But he didn't count on Lennon. My daughter had been watching him like a hawk all night. Just as Dorian began to fall, Lennon stepped forward and stuck out her foot with the precision of a soccer player. Dorian tripped for real this time. He went flying forward, the red wine missing my dress completely. Instead, the entire glass emptied directly onto Ottilie's snow-white designer gown. The red liquid splashed across her chest and face, making her look like she had been in a battle. The room went silent for a heartbeat before a few people started to snicker. Ottilie let out a shriek that could have shattered glass. She stood there, dripping with wine, her perfect image ruined in front of the entire city. Dorian scrambled to help her, but he only made it worse by slipping in the puddle himself. It was the most satisfying moment of the night. Lennon looked at me and winked, then quietly stepped back into the shadows. I looked down at Dorian, who was struggling to get up. "You should be more careful, Dorian," I said, my voice echoing. "When you try to throw dirt or wine at others, you usually end up getting messy yourself." The room was still buzzing from the wine incident when Hawk stepped onto the stage. The music stopped, and the lights dimmed. Everyone expected him to give a standard thank you speech for the gala. Instead, he looked out at the crowd with a very serious expression. "Tonight is about more than just a party," Hawk began. "It's about the future of our city's economy. I am proud to announce that as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, my firm has successfully acquired 51% of Sterling Vane Industries. We are now the majority owners of the Sterling Empire." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Dorian looked like he was having a heart attack. He had been so busy trying to bully us that he hadn't noticed Hawk was quietly buying up every available share of the company from the smaller, nervous investors. Dorian tried to shout from the floor, claiming the takeover was illegal, but Hawk ignored him. "And because I believe in true leadership," Hawk continued, his voice booming, "I am introducing the new majority shareholder who will be representing the family's interest on the board. Please welcome Miss Lennon Sterling." I walked onto the stage with Lennon, our hands joined. The crowd erupted in applause. People who had ignored us for 5 years were now cheering. Lennon stood tall, looking at the stunned faces of Dorian and Ottilie. She wasn't just a lawn-mower girl anymore. She was the most powerful person in the room. Hawk looked at me and nodded, his eyes filled with pride. I looked down at Dorian, who was being held back by security. The nobody, widow, and the useless daughter had just taken his throne, and we weren't planning on giving it back. Ottilie couldn't handle the defeat. She lost all of her high society grace and turned into a screaming, wild woman. She tried to lung across the stage at Lennon, her face twisted with pure hatred. "You little brat, you stole my life. That money is mine," she shrieked, her wine-stained dress flapping around her. The crowd backed away in horror. But before she could get anywhere near my daughter, a large, solid man stepped between them. It was Rafferty, the head of security for the gala, and a man I had known for years. Rafferty didn't just stop her. He pinned her arms to her sides with a firm, professional grip. He looked at Ottilie with a look of pure disgust. "That's enough, Mrs. Sterling," Rafferty said, his voice low and dangerous. Ottilie tried to spit at him, but he didn't flinch. "My brother was one of the workers who died in that factory fire because your son wouldn't pay for the sprinklers," Rafferty whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "I've been waiting 5 years for the moment your family finally fell. You're lucky I'm a professional, or I'd let you fall myself." Ottilie went silent, the mention of the fire draining the last of her energy. The investors and socialites were all recording the scene on their phones. The legacy Ottilie had worked so hard to protect was being destroyed by her own hands. Security led her and Dorian out of the museum through the back exit, away from the cameras and the lights. They were no longer the rulers of the city. They were a disgrace. I looked at Rafferty and thanked him with a nod. He had waited for justice just like I had, and tonight, we both finally got it. As the security guards were leading Dorian out, the heavy oak doors of the museum swung open. Brielle walked in, looking elegant but terrified. She wasn't alone. She was holding the hand of her brother, Caius, the fire marshal. She walked straight to the center of the room where the police were waiting. She didn't look at Dorian as she pulled a digital recorder from her purse. "I have something you need to hear," she said, her voice shaking but clear. She pressed play, and the sound of Dorian's voice filled the silent museum ballroom. "Just delay the report, Caius. Tell them it was an accidental electrical surge. I don't care about the workers, they're replaceable. I need that insurance payout by the end of the month." Dorian's voice boomed from the speakers. The recording was crystal clear. It was the final, undeniable proof of his crimes. Dorian tried to scream that it was a fake, that it was AI-generated, but Caius stepped forward. "I was there, Dorian. I took the money, and I regret it every day. I'm here to confess to my part in the cover-up." Dorian's last defense collapsed. He tried to claim he was only protecting the company's equipment and that the fire was already out of control. But in doing so, he effectively admitted he was at the factory that night. He had been trying to lie his way out, but he had just talked himself into a prison cell. The police stepped forward and clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists. The man who had kicked over a little girl's mower was now being led away in chains for the murder of his own brother and dozens of innocent workers. The fallout from the gala was massive. The next morning, I drove the vintage sedan back to Lennon's school. I walked into Principal Lowell's office without an appointment. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, realizing that I now had the power to fire him with a single phone call. "Dakota, I was just about to call you," he stammered, his face pale. "I wanted to apologize for the misunderstanding about the scholarship. We've already corrected the records." He was trying to save his job, but I wasn't interested in his excuses. I placed a check for the entire school's scholarship fund on his desk, an amount that would cover every low-income student for the next 10 years. "I'm not here for an apology, Lowell," I said, my voice cold. "I'm here to accept your resignation. You allowed a wealthy family to bully a 10-year-old girl and tried to destroy her future for a donation. You are not fit to lead this school." Lowell tried to argue, but I pointed to the door. "I've already appointed your successor. She's waiting in the hallway." Lark, a brilliant former teacher whom Ottilie had fired 3 years ago for insubordination, which really meant she had stood up for a student, walked in. She looked confident and ready to lead. "Hello, Lowell," Lark said with a small, satisfied smile. "I believe you have some packing to do." I walked out of the school with Lennon, knowing that the tuition trap had been turned into a new beginning for every student who didn't have a sterling name. We had taken back the school, and we were just getting started on the rest of the city. The final act of our revenge took place at the Sterling Mansion. I arrived with 3 large moving trucks and a team of legal bailiffs. Ottilie was sitting in the grand living room, surrounded by her expensive paintings, refusing to move. She thought she could still stay in the house because of some ancient loophole, but I had the final piece of the puzzle. I handed her a document that made her breath stop. It was the original will that Albin, the grandfather, had left in a hidden safe at his lawyer's office. "You and Dorian were never the owners of this estate, Ottilie," I said, my voice echoing in the hollow room. "Albin knew what you were. He left the house and the grounds to Pascal, and in the event of his death, to me and Lennon. You and Dorian were only allowed to live here as caretakers until Lennon turned 10 years old. That birthday was last week. Your time is officially up." I handed her a formal eviction notice. She had 10 minutes to pack her personal bags before the locks were changed, and the house was turned over to the Winslow Trust. Ottilie didn't scream this time. She just looked at me with a hollow, defeated expression. She realized that everything she had fought for, the house, the name, the power, was gone. She packed a single suitcase and walked down the grand staircase she had once ruled. As she reached the front door, she saw the moving truck starting to take the furniture. I wasn't keeping it. I was donating it all to a local furniture bank. The Sterling Mansion was being emptied of its coldness, and Ottilie was leaving it with nothing but her shame. Dorian tried to save himself from prison by turning on his own family. From his holding cell, he tried to pin the factory fire on his younger brother, Corin. Corin had been in a mental health facility for years, and Dorian claimed he was the one who had tampered with the wiring. He thought he could use his sick brother as a scapegoat one last time. He told the police that Corin was unstable and had been angry at Pascal. It was a desperate, disgusting lie, but Dorian was a desperate man. But Dorian didn't know that Corin wasn't actually sick. He had been faking his illness and staying in the facility because he knew Dorian would try to kill him if he stayed at the mansion. Corin walked out of the facility that afternoon, looking healthy and sharp. He had been the one who had helped me find the hidden safety deposit box. He arrived at the police station with a series of audio recordings he had made through a bug he had planted in Dorian's office years ago. He had been waiting for the right moment to speak. The recordings captured Dorian discussing every detail of his plans, including how he was going to dispose of anyone who got in his way. Corin's testimony was the final nail in the coffin. He looked at Dorian through the glass of the interrogation room and shook his head. "I stayed in that hospital for 5 years to stay away from you, Dorian," Corin said. "But I was always listening. You thought I was broken, but I was just waiting for Dakota to finish you off." Dorian screamed in rage, realizing he had no one left to betray. With Dorian and Caius in custody, the police turned their attention to the family's finances. Audley tried to make one last move to save her fortune. She tried to wire the family's remaining $10 million into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. She thought she could flee the country and live in luxury while her son went to prison. She sat in a cheap hotel room, typing the transfer codes into her laptop, a look of desperate greed on her face. She was so close to being free. But the accountant on the other end of the line wasn't who she thought it was. It was Winslow, Hawk's sister, and the city's top forensic accountant. Winslow had already been granted emergency access to the Sterling Vane accounts by the court. She watched in real time as Audley tried to move the money. Instead of letting the transfer go through to the Cayman Islands, Winslow redirected the entire $10 million into a new fund for the families of the workers who had died in the factory fire. Audley watched the screen, waiting for the success message. Instead, a message appeared that read, "Funds redirected to Victims' Compensation Fund. Transaction complete." Audley let out a scream of pure agony. She had just donated every cent she had left to the people she looked down on the most. She was now officially penniless. Winslow sent a screenshot of the transaction to me with a single word: satisfied. I smiled, knowing that the frozen assets were finally being used to melt the hearts of the families who had suffered for so long. Dorian wasn't going down without a fight. Even from prison, he filed a massive lawsuit suing me for emergency custody of Lennon. He claimed that I was unstable and financially reckless, and that I was using Lennon's trust fund for my own revenge fantasy. He hoped to get control of my daughter so he could use her as leverage to get out of his criminal charges. It was a terrifying move, and for a moment I was scared. He had hired a high-priced lawyer who was known for winning impossible cases. The day of the custody hearing arrived. The courtroom was filled with reporters and the city's socialites. Dorian sat in his orange jumpsuit, looking smug. His lawyer started a long, insulting speech about how I was a cleaning woman who wasn't fit to raise a sterling heir. I sat at the table, clutching Lennon's hand, feeling the familiar burn of injustice. But then, the judge looked at Lennon and asked if she had anything to say. Lennon stood up, her face calm and steady. She walked to the witness stand and pulled out a small tablet. She didn't give a speech. She simply played the recording from Chapter 1, the footage from the mower's dashcam. The entire courtroom watched as Dorian kicked over a little girl's mower and emptied her coin jar into a pond. They heard him call her trash and peasant. The judge watched the video in total silence, his face turning into a mask of pure disgust. When the video ended, the judge didn't even wait for the lawyers to speak. "This petition is not only denied," the judge barked, "but I am ordering a permanent no-contact order for Mr. Sterling Vane. He is a predator, not a father." The Sterling Vane empire was officially over. To pay back the victims and the creditors, the court ordered a final auction of the family's massive art and jewelry collection. It was the social event of the year, but not for the reasons Audley had ever wanted. The elite of the city gathered to watch the fall of the Sterlings. I attended the auction with Lennon, sitting in the front row. Every time a piece of Pascal's personal property came up, his watches, his favorite paintings, his desk, I raised my paddle. The room would go silent as I made my bid. Because of the scandal, no one else in the city wanted to bid against us. They were either too ashamed or too scared of Hawk. I bought back every single one of Pascal's personal items for exactly $1 each. The auctioneer, a man who had once been on Dorian's payroll, had no choice but to slam the gavel and say, "Sold," over and over. I wasn't just buying things. I was reclaiming my husband's memory from the people who had tried to erase it. By the end of the night, the sterling collection was gone. The jewelry Audley had worn to mock me was now in a box, destined to be sold to pay for the workers' medical bills. I stood in the middle of the empty auction hall, holding Pascal's favorite gold watch. Lennon looked at me and smiled. "We got him back, Mom," she whispered. "Every bit of him." I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in 5 years. We were no longer the girl who mowed lawns and her beggar mother. We were the ones who had finished the job. I decided to pay one last visit to Dorian before his final sentencing. I found him in a gray holding cell, looking small and defeated without his silk suits. He looked up at me with a hollow, bitter expression. "Are you happy now, Dakota?" He spat, his voice raspy. "You've broken the family. You've destroyed the name. You've turned us into a joke. I hope you're proud of yourself for being so cruel to your own kin." He was still trying to act like he was the victim of a family betrayal. I sat on the cold metal bench across from him, looking at the man who had caused so much pain. "A family isn't a bank account, Dorian," I said, my voice calm and steady. "And it isn't a title. You're the one who broke the family 5 years ago when you locked those factory doors. You're the one who destroyed the name when you kicked over a little girl's lawnmower because you were afraid of her strength. I didn't break anything. I just stopped pretending to be part of your wreckage." Dorian looked away, his jaw tightening. He had no more lies to tell and no more people to bully. I stood up to leave, and he reached out toward the glass. "What's going to happen to the company?" he asked, a flicker of his old greed showing. I looked at him one last time. "The company is being rebranded, Dorian. It's no longer Sterling Vane, it's the Winslow Sterling Foundation. And your mother, she's currently working at a laundromat to pay for her hotel room. Enjoy your new home, Dorian. You've earned it." Lennon and I finally moved back into our old home, the mansion that Albin had left us. But we didn't live in it like the Sterlings had. We didn't fill it with cold art and silent servants. We turned the entire East Wing into a business incubator for young entrepreneurs from low-income neighborhoods. We provided them with the tools, the technology, and the funding they needed to start their own businesses. We wanted the mansion to be a place of growth and hope instead of a monument to greed. The very first student to sign up for the program was a girl named Indy. She was a brilliant student from Lennon's school who had been bullied by Thorne for years. She had an idea for a solar-powered lawnmower that could be used in neighborhoods with limited electricity. Lennon helped her build the first prototype in the same workshop where Pascal used to work. Watching them laugh and plan for the future filled the house with a warmth it had never known. We were using the Sterling fortune to build a city where nobody would ever have to dive into a pond for $1 again. We also turned the koi pond into a community swimming pool for the neighborhood kids. I watched from the balcony as Lennon and Indy taught a group of younger children how to swim. Ottilie used to look down from the same spot and laugh at us. Now, I look down and see life. We aren't just surviving, we are thriving. The Winslow Sterling Foundation is now the largest employer in the city, and every worker has a stake in the company. We have turned a peasant's sweat into a city's success. On the anniversary of Pascal's death, Hawk and I met at the site of the old factory. We had cleared the debris and turned the entire block into a beautiful memorial garden. It was filled with white roses and stone benches where families could sit and remember their loved ones. At the very center of the garden, Lennon had placed her old, rusted push mower. We had it encased in glass, a permanent reminder of how a small girl's determination had changed everything. It was the most important monument in the city. Hawk handed me a small, sealed envelope. "I found this in the safe deposit box Albin left for me," he said, his voice soft. "It's a letter Pascal wrote on the night of the fire. He knew the building wasn't safe, and he knew Dorian was behind it. He wanted you to know how much he loved you, Dakota." I opened the letter with trembling hands. Pascal's handwriting was clear and strong. He told me that he was proud of the life we had built and that he knew I was strong enough to protect Lennon. He told me he was dreaming of a future where you are the queen. I stood in the garden, the wind rustling through the roses, and finally felt the weight of the last 5 years leave my shoulders. Pascal had known I could do it. He had believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Hawk stood by my side, a silent and steady friend. We had finished the work Pascal had started, and we had done it together. The factory fire was no longer a secret of shame. It was a story of justice and the power of a mother's love. I am driving the vintage luxury sedan down the main highway, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Lennon is sitting in the passenger seat, looking out the window at the city we have helped rebuild. We pass a man on the side of the road with a flat tire. It's Imric, Dorian's former right-hand man and the one who helped him with the forged will. He's standing there in a cheap, stained suit, looking at his broken car with a look of pure despair. He's now broke and walking, just like we once were. He looks up as we pass, his eyes widening as he recognizes the car and the woman behind the wheel. He raises a hand as if to ask for help, but then he sees Lennon. I don't slow down. I don't feel a need for revenge, but I also don't feel a need for mercy for a man who helped destroy my husband. I look at Lennon and she gives me a small, knowing smile. "He has feet, Mom," she says, her voice echoing the cold logic Dorian once used. "He can walk. It builds character." We drive past him, the powerful engine of the sedan leaving him in the dust. We are heading toward a new future, one where our names are respected and our hearts are whole. I am Dakota, and my daughter is Lennon. We were once the mistakes of a billionaire family, but now we are the ones who define what a legacy truly means. We drive into the sunset, the road ahead clear and bright, knowing that we have finally found our way home. The girl who mowed lawns finally bought her mom a car, and so much more.